Okay, hello, and thank you very much for joining us today. For those of you who are wondering why I've got a balloon, I'm not sure which side it's on, behind me. It's actually our 20th anniversary today of accommodation for students. It's not my 20th birthday again. So we obviously welcome to. Thank you very much for joining us. This is our very first webinar, so please do bear with us whilst we go through. But hopefully, we've got some useful information to share with you today. For those who have not met me before, my name is Simon Thompson. I'm founder of Accommodation for Students. I set up the website 20 years ago with my business partner after having first-hand difficulties finding student accommodation. It was very early days of the internet when we set it up. I said we experienced first-hand difficulty finding student accommodation. At that point in time, it was no more than a paper list that you were given to go out to properties, and you would usually find that you would arrive at a property that had already been booked by a group of students. So we knew that it could be made more simple, and we just had nothing to lose at that point in time. No families, no commitments or anything. So we just spent literally every spare hour working on the website and doing focus groups with students and landlords. And we built up a critical mass of landlords using the site. And obviously, it's been a 20-year story of with a lot that's happened in between. I bought my partner out in 2017. And we've really sort of heavily invested in the website in recent years. We've got a great team that we've built at the moment, and we're really enjoying the work that we're doing. And there's a lot that's installed. Although we're 20 years in, it still feels very much like the beginning for us now. So yeah, hopefully today is going to be useful for you. We did a survey and got just over 1,000 responses from students in. So hopefully this is really, really good data, and it will give you some nuggets of information for you to use. Obviously, this year has been a really, really hectic year for all of us. I don't think anybody would have expected what's happened this year. Nobody had a crystal ball on what was going to happen with COVID-19, and it hits us very unexpectedly. I think we all agree that it was quite fortunate from a student lettings perspective that it happened at the time that it did, quite late in the student season for us. We noticed that we did a research to our landlords back in May this year just to find out how you were finding things. And from that research study, we found that 30% of landlords said that their tenants had left, 50% had some tenants return home, and 23% of landlords said they were very concerned about the impact that it caused. In terms of how it had affected accommodation for students during that time period, we started the year off really, really strong. We were way up on last year in terms of inquiries, and quite a lot of landlords and PBSA providers had already had quite strong letting periods by sort of February this year. We had two periods we were impacted traffic-wise. So the first one was in March this year, where we had a 27% decline as students returned home. We then found that traffic went up, and we had quite a busy period, but it generally tended to be students that were sort of researching on the net, weren't in a position to do viewings because of the lockdown restrictions that were in place. We had big demand for virtual tours, video tours of properties, etc. And then we obviously, not that COVID wasn't bad enough, but we had the A-level shambles that took place, where there was 15,000 students that were moved, and there was plenty of students that had booked accommodation then changed university. So it was absolute chaos. And then just to top it all off, we had the problems with visas for international students, which has then changed the sort of start dates and start times. So it's been a very different year for us this year. That being said, what we did notice, which is obviously to the benefit of landlords and agents, is that we were actually 40% up in HMO inquiries this year. So very, very strong demand for smaller properties with outdoor living space. We did notice a marginal decline in the PBSA inquiries, which has obviously been a very strong area in recent years. So that was very interesting for us, and we have seen that even in the start of this new academic year, that inquiries have been strong for HMO properties again. So on that note, I will pass you over to my colleague Nick, who's going to share with you our research findings.
Thanks very much, Simon. Yeah, I'm Nick Ems, and I've been running a research program for a number of years with accommodation for students. So I think it's fair to say ever since Simon set the business up, research has been an important part of what the business has been about, whether that's the data that we've been able to get from our website, or working closely with students. So we get students very much involved in the business on a day-to-day basis, but we also run a sort of formal program of primary research. So that's online focus groups or focus groups and a lot of survey work with our extensive database. We have active database of over 100,000 students. So the particular research that we want to share with you today, we actually conducted online groups with 40 students from different parts of the UK and internationally, and analysed over 1,000 survey responses. Just part of that kind of continuous effort really to try and understand what students think and feel and do, but also specifically to address some of the questions that everybody's got at the moment around COVID and the impacts that it might have. So when we decided to put the session together, the main purpose really is just to share this with you, give you some insight into some of the findings that we have discovered, and in particular, the events of the recent weeks, just talk through the impact of COVID on the 2021 experience for students, see how that impacts on the university experience, and then therefore sort of trickles down onto how students are experiencing accommodation, and then try and wrap that up with some practical tips. So I think draw on some of our findings with some suggestions, but also this 20 years of experience that we have, and try and pull things together with some practical marketing tips as well. So start in September, record numbers of students were accepted onto university places, as you may well know. So around a 4% increase in students with confirmed places, and actually a 9% increase in international students, which is particularly driven by non-EU students. So there was two things going on here. So despite the concern about the impact on university and university attendance, one kind of enduring appeal, if you like, of UK universities, one to domestic students, particularly in times of economic crisis when there's, I suppose, relatively few other choices, tends to have an impact, a positive impact on recruitment, and this kind of global impact or global reputation of UK universities, which really appeals to international students and continues to do so. So that's really positive. I think the caveat is there's some debate as to whether all of those international students will turn up and take the place. So some of them can make decisions quite late in the cycle. So might be making decisions even late into October. So sort of time will tell. There's some anecdotal evidence that international students haven't shown up. So there was a recent Knight Frank survey that showed occupancy rates below booking rates, for example. But I think it'll play out over the next few months before we fully understand that segment of the market. I think there's also some change as well with many postgraduate courses starting in January this year. So it's a kind of second cycle of accommodation recruitment, if you like, with postgraduate students looking to start their course and therefore looking for accommodation in January as well. I think it's fair to say that universities did a pretty good job, really, of encouraging students to attend. So I think the communication around trying to reassure students that they were going to have a good experience on campus was there for people to see. I think it's probably fair to say that when we did our research, some students were a little bit disappointed with what they were receiving. So around 70% told us that they had a blended learning experience, this mix between online and face-to-face. And it's probably fair to say more heavily skewed towards online. And indeed, almost a quarter of students told us that they were experiencing online-only learning. Only a very small handful of students were enjoying a sort of face-to-face experience. So that was, I think, pretty much all most universities could do, given the circumstances and given the need to keep people safe, whilst trying and endeavour to get students back into university and in and around campus. So I think it's fair to say that there's some concern about this. So around 80 or 85% of students said they were worried about the impact of COVID on the university experience. So it's a concern. 60% of those are mostly worried about their impact on the studies. So that's the main sort of area of concern. So whether this blended experience or online experience would diminish that sort of learning that they feel they're paying for. So that was quite significant feedback. Only 25% were concerned about their impact on the social life. So it fits with a lot of the research that we do, that students are really mostly concerned with that kind of the studying aspect of university, getting a good degree. The sort of social aspect is secondary. Interestingly, in terms of health risks, only 14% of students are concerned about the impact of COVID on their health, which again probably reflects that younger demographic, but it's most of the impact on studies that was a concern. I think it's one of the areas of frustration for Simon and myself has been some of the coverage of students. So we saw a lot in late September, early October about sort of parties and this kind of not necessarily adhering to the guidelines, which often can get kind of high profile within the media, but doesn't really reflect the reality on the ground. 88% of students told us that they thought that the social distancing guidelines were really important and that they would adhere to them. So only 7% felt that they weren't important. So I think it's really important to understand students take this seriously and they're trying to behave in a responsible way. And again, we find students to be well behaved, smart. They understand what the implications are, and some of this coverage just isn't really bear any resemblance to reality for most students. I think their main concern, as I said, really was the impact on their studies. So I think when we asked students what they feel about university and whether it's value for money, almost 3/4 said it wasn't. So again, there's probably two things at play here. I think there's a concern generally from students about the value of the university degree, the cost of it, and then this is probably intensified really with the current circumstances and the changes to the way that the university experience is being delivered. So it's quite concerning in the fact that there's quite a lot of students that don't feel university is good value for money at the moment. I think, though, it's not just to do with COVID. I think that we asked, for example, some students or the students in the survey whether if they could get a discount, they would be happy to stick with blended learning, or whether they would rather pay more and get the face-to-face experience. And it was interesting that quite a lot of students at the moment would go for that blended learning if it meant that there was a reduction in tuition fees. And it probably reflects the fact that there's some underlying tensions with the cost of a university education in some university establishments, basically. So there's an underlying theme as well as something that's perhaps come to the fore with the COVID situation. One of the things, or a sort of theme that we were keen to understand more, was how would students behave specifically in regard to their accommodation. So pre the lockdown, we tried to explore whether this change in university experience might impact on the way that they use their accommodation. So we wanted to understand whether students were likely to consider leaving because they felt like they didn't need to be on campus very much. So it's fair to say that there was a small minority of students that felt that they might consider leaving their accommodation. So while most were keen to sort of stay, there were a number that were thinking around potentially leaving their accommodation because they possibly didn't need to be on campus as much as they expected. More specifically, though, when we talk to students about the lockdown situation, it's a bit of a mixed picture. So a third, approximately, prepared to stay and keen to stay, about 30% possibly to return home under the lockdown conditions, which is broadly similar to sort of phase one of the lockdown, the early stage, if you remember from Simon's introduction. And then around 20% are really going to make a decision around what their housemates do. So that's the important role of housemates. And as you might expect, that's more prevalent in HMOs and shared accommodation, shared housing, where around 50% of the students that responded said, yeah, look, I'm going to make a decision based on what my housemates do. So there's clearly kind of that social consideration and what the students are going to do. I think it's definitely fair to say, though, that there is this sort of desire for a return to normality. So I think students would like to stay and would like to have the standard experience if they can. So we explore this in more depth in our focus group. So, for example, a third-year student in Southampton was saying, look, I've been at home for 6 months. I really want to get back to university. I want to be with my friends in my bubble, and I want to be enjoying my second home. And I think we've got that theme definitely coming out from the focus groups in terms of that intention, and people really wanting to get back to normal. And then again, you can see this theme around people making a decision around what the housemates would do. Whereas international students, like the student from Taiwan, had slightly different considerations of being so far away from home. I think housemates are really important in this. 90% of our students told us they have really good relationships with housemates, so an important part of the decision making, but also really an important part of the accommodation experience. And a lot of students can make a decision based, how the year plays out based on what their housemates do as part of that decision making. I think the other thing in terms of, okay, what is the impact potentially of the second wave and this current lockdown is we explored some of the research with NUS, and quite a lot of students feel more prepared this time. So well over 80% feel prepared. And if you imagine, I suppose that reflects the fact that a lot of the learning experience is delivered online anyway. So it doesn't necessarily impact on that campus experience, which is diminished somewhat. So some of the students have been through this before, so there's a sense of preparedness as well. It perhaps won't have the shock and the impact of that early COVID experience where universities shut and a number of students went home. So I think, again, that's really positive. The other thing that we were keen to understand was whether sort of natural breaks would influence behaviour. So we explored Christmas, for example. So we wanted to understand whether students would be looking to return to accommodation following the Christmas break, or whether they wouldn't. So overwhelmingly, the majority of students told us, yeah, look, they're looking to return, 75% come back after the Christmas break, which again is positive in terms of intention and just showing that desire for a return to normality. Specifically here, we took the opportunity to drill down in and around this rent payment. So I think one of the concerns that we heard a lot back in April and May was whether students would pay rent. There was quite a lot of media coverage at the time, actually, which was fairly favourable towards students, quite a lot of sympathy. So students feeling that if they didn't use a room, they didn't have to pay for it, they'd been sent home and so on. I'm sure many of you will remember that. So we explored in detail about students' intention towards paying rent. 60% of students told us that they intended to pay rent come what may. And then around 25% said, we're going to pay rent, but only if I stay in the accommodation. So what we then discovered was that actually students in HMOs, shared housing, are more like 70-75% likely to say they will pay their rent. And it's students in university-owned halls of residence or PBSA accommodation that are more likely to say, look, I'm only going to pay if I stay in my room. So I think this is potentially an unintended consequence of some of the rent relief that was given earlier in the year from some of the larger PBSA providers. I think for HMOs, shared houses, students are more likely to say, look, we're going to be paying our rent come what may. I think that's not to though. I think there's definitely a context of students feeling the financial pressure a little bit, which I think around a half of students told us that they were concerned about the impact of COVID on their finances. And there's been another piece of research which has said and shown that around a half of students have had a parent or somebody they rely on for their income have their income reduced. So there's a concern here. And rent and basics makes up a large proportion of student expenditure, as you might expect. So rent accounts for around a third of expenditure. So the basics, utilities, rent, food, travel, course costs is around 80%. So it's a significant amount for students, and I think what it's doing is driving some behaviours. So what I've seen over the course of 20 odd years working in the student sector is students are very adaptable, and they adapt to the situation. So one of the things that, again, that we've been exploring is how students are adapting to these financial pressures. And in short, there's much more intention to look for part-time employment. So sort of pre-COVID, 54% didn't have a job. Post-COVID, 54% are looking or do have a job. So in terms of addressing some of these financial concerns, students looking to take that in their own hands. And again, some of the things that we were told in focus groups, before COVID, we didn't have the need to work for uni, but now I do 4 hours a day as a delivery driver. Again, this intent really to address this situation and make sure this financial shortfall can be addressed. One of the key things, though, and it's really important to emphasise, is this degree of satisfaction with student accommodation. So 81% of students really happy with accommodation. And I think this reflects the great job that student landlords, agents are doing in terms of managing the properties, managing the tenancies. It's really positive. It's not necessarily something that we hear a lot about, and I think that's a really strong message. I think back to some of the issues that students have with their university and value for money, it's positive that there's this strong degree of satisfaction with their current accommodation, which I think is really positive. 60% of students told us that they felt their accommodation was value for money as well. So again, if we can contrast that with what students are saying about their university, another significant cost, that's really positive. And I think that it's also fair to say that students were equally likely to be satisfied with accommodation at all levels of rent. So it's not necessarily to do with pricing, it's to do with general satisfaction with the accommodation provided, which we feel is a really positive message and very strong. There are things that students are looking for. So in terms of, okay, well, how can we be better supported and how can we be supported in our accommodation? One of the things that came out strongly and unprompted in focus groups, and we've followed up in our survey, was flexible tenancy contracts. So I think this really is a COVID theme. It's not something that necessarily students think. Outside of COVID, 3/4 of students told us that actually the typical student tenancy is the right length of tenancy. I think there's a degree of kind of looking for a bit of flexibility reflects perhaps that uncertainty. Potential for marketing advantage, we have seen some of our PBSA partners offer degrees of flexibility. Other things, and we're going to explore this a little bit in a moment, is making it easy to view properties online. So the constraints that they face at the moment, being able to view properties easily online is something that they've asked for. And then to a lesser extent, but still that resonates, COVID-friendly features, as Simon mentioned, outdoor spaces, for example, is something that is valued. And I think there's a small but consistent number of students who are looking for more information, more advice really, about the whole situation, but specifically in relation to accommodation, perhaps looking for that bit of reassurance. What we also were keen to understand is, look, is there going to be an impact on when and where students start looking for a place to live? So from our national perspective, AFS, what we will typically see is students really starting house hunting or the season in November. So even late October, but particularly in November is when students typically start looking. So I think around 17% of students said they plan to look for 2021, both September 2021 in November, which again is positive. We'd expect it to be slightly higher. So to illustrate, the first week in November, AFS was 20% up in traffic compared to the previous week in October. The year before, 2019, it was 28% up. So I think there's a little bit of an impact in that real race to find accommodation for September 2021, which you might anticipate. But still, 50% of students are saying we're going to be looking for accommodation in 2021 in the next 3 months. So there is that desire there to go and find their accommodation for next year. 16%, I think, is worth noting. I'm not sure. I think that, again, it plays into this communication piece where I think that some students are a little bit unsure about what to do and what might happen. And I think that, there's a role there for that enhanced communication. One of the things that we did, and we explored this a lot in the focus groups, is we tried to understand what students were looking for, what the key features of an online sort of experience, and what would make it successful. 81% of students start their search for accommodation with a Google search. So this online element is really important. And I think we explored around 30 features, and actually it was two of the simpler things that students really came to the fore and said, this is really important. Reviews of the property, 40%, and it really came out strongly. Students are keen to see what other students think about properties. Now, on accommodation for students in particular, we call those testimonials, and it's noteworthy that not everybody uses those at the moment. And there's a great opportunity there to get a little bit of an advantage if you can get some testimonials or reviews on there, because it's what students want. And they're obviously looking for this reassurance around online house hunting and as much information as possible. And virtual tours the same. So virtual or video tour, in a sense, can we get as much information online to enable us to make as much of the decision making online as possible? And again, this is something that is going to be introduced over the next week or so on Accommodation for Students for our landlord partners, which again will enable you to meet some of these requests and requirements. Some of the other things we explored just didn't have the same resonance. So there is a cohort of students, and they're typically international students, it's fair to say. They're looking for promotional offers. So, X off, Y off. And it's typically, I think, driven by the PBSA sector rather than sort of shared housing, HMOs. So something that we'll track, but not necessarily that we think is particularly relevant at the moment. So I think that in terms of the key themes that we've discovered or explored, I think there's some real clarity in terms of what students are looking for from online. As we said, 81% start with an online search, and they're looking for as much information online as possible. There is a potential marketing advantage to be had from flexible tenancies, not necessarily easy to deliver. But there are 16% of students who are a little undecided about when to look, are looking for perhaps a bit more information. And I think this, plays into a key message from Accommodation for Students really is communication and ongoing. As much communication with students as possible right now is really important. Unfortunately, it's relatively easy to deliver in the sense that students are digitally focused anyway, so they're likely to be online at the moment, like much of the rest of the population, using digital tools to keep in touch. So these are some of the tools that students are using most frequently, but also communicating more through social media. So in terms of reassuring perhaps those undecided students or keeping in touch with them, social is obviously a great way to do that and relatively low cost. And we just see continuing rise of Instagram as the key social media for students. So over 10 years, we've tracked this, and Instagram is the key way that students want to keep in touch. We tried to then distill down some of this into a little toolkit. So what we did was we've taken some of our standard advice, sort of over from the last 20 years of experience, I suppose, and mapped onto it some of the things that we had discovered through the course of our research. So it's just quite an interesting exercise if we could focus this down. And we looked at, what can be done to the property, relatively easy. What marketing tools can we use? And one of the positive things is that there's just some real simple, quick wins as we've kind of tried to bring to the fore here. It's worth noting, in terms of property and key messages around the property, it's easy to dismiss the inclusive of bills, inclusive rent. And I think if you're an established landlord, you know this already. If you're newer to the market, it's just worth reflecting the importance of this. 80% of students tell us bills inclusive is important. So, it's in a competitive market, it's important to, I think, meet those requirements. 40% say it's really important. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And again, I'm sure as many of you will be aware, broadband, superfast broadband has always been important. Pre-pandemic, 70% of students, are told that superfast broadband was important. That's only increased with the focus on online learning. So again, a key sort of feature. And then we see some landlords being really clever in terms of embedding technology features into their property offers, whether that's profiling flat screen TV in the living room or various TV packages, again, which play out really well in terms of the current climate. So, not difficult to achieve a flexible tenancy offering, but some of these things are relatively simple to address. In terms of marketing, Simon's going to touch on some of the things that accommodation for students can do. So the other things that I wanted just to bring to the fore are, one remarkable thing is that we do, students do often struggle to get a response to inquiries, and they have high expectations about responsiveness. And I think it is a consistent issue. So at this time, rapid responses to inquiries is, believe it or not, likely to make you stand out amongst your peers and potentially give you a bit of a competitive advantage. We've talked about student reviews, and I think also sort of up the scale of difficultness, if you like. A video tour, a virtual tour is something that is obviously being requested, will add a lot of value to your marketing, but fundamentally some quality images of your property. Again, it's an issue that we do struggle with a bit on accommodation for students, with particular landlords and some agencies getting quality images of the property to present it to its best ability. Again, a real simple, quick win that can make you stand out against some of your peers. So I think in terms of some of that communication, in terms of we talked about social, it's important for those students that need the reassurance right now. So it's getting something that can be done. And I think it's also worth knowing that we're understanding this as well. So one of the key things that we've recently decided to do is make a big investment into our social activity, because we feel like this ongoing communication is only going to help students feel more comfortable, and encourage them to, if they're wavering about making a decision about the property for next year, give them that confidence to move forward. So let's give a quick overview of some of our recent research highlights. I'm going to hand over to Simon, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about how we can help, and talk to you about some of our plans moving forward.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was absolutely great. Thank you. And there has been a few questions coming through on the Q&A, so I've been responding to a few whilst you've been talking there. But yeah, that was great. And obviously, in terms of what we can do on accommodation for students, we really, we're here to help our landlords. So, we appreciate all feedback that you can give us in terms of, what you think we should be doing right now. In terms of some of the things that we've got on the site that can help you at the moment, one of the things we have is a boost functionality. So once you've put your property onto accommodation for students, we have what's called boost credits that you can take. And you can, the way in which the algorithm works on accommodation for students is it's last served. So as you put your property on, it goes to the top of the list, and then it starts to move down the listings as other properties get added on. So what you can do is you can get these boost credits which pop your property back up to the top, which obviously gives it more visibility. And it's worked quite successfully for us in this way, because it's meant that those landlords that have needed to give their properties a bit of a push, where it's quite competitive, they've been able to do so, and then attract the leads and inquiries. We are constantly working on optimization. I noticed one of the questions was in there about, how do you keep it up there? So obviously one of the main things is site content that we have. So we invest very heavily in the website content through blogs, articles, guides that we produce for both students and for landlords. There's quite a good knowledge base there if you wish to take a look. We're constantly working on the optimization of the site. We've been very fortunate in that we've held the Google #1 spot for student accommodation for a 20-year time period now, which I'm quite proud of. It's been a long time, we really do work hard on that. In terms of the listings on the website, as Nick said, make sure that first image is right on the listings. If you do have high-speed internet, I'd highly recommend that you include that in the actual listing description. In a lot of locations now, there's only 2 meg broadband speed, and that's just simply not good enough for a group of 5 or 6 students. So it's important to put that in there, as it's really, really important for students. We are investing in sort of a searching and filtering on the website, but we've now built some of that functionality into the landlord admin area. And then on the live support side, we're here very much to help students with any inquiries and requirements that they've got coming through on the website. We've really manned up our student team to deliver on that, and we're hoping to move in the near future to sort of having a 24-hour service round the clock, so that anybody who lands on the website and needs to speak to somebody can do so. Let's go to the next slide, Nick. So as we were talking, we've invested quite heavily in the website and the functionality. So we've released a new landlord admin area now, and hopefully you can see from the screenshot there, it's a lot more simplified than the one that we had in the past. So we've made it very easy for landlords to be able to add properties, whether that be through desktop or mobile. Reviewing and managing your properties, we've focused very heavily on, again, all from feedback that you've given us, so thank you very much for that. The inquiries area, all of your inquiries are stored within this section, and we're planning on building on that area in the future and into 2021 to make it much more useful for you in terms of responding to tenants. There's performance reporting in there that we've built in, so you can now look at your page views, inquiries. You can will very shortly be able to run different timescales on that, so that you can really play around with it to your heart's content. We've got testimonials functionality in there. I noticed that one landlord had just commented through the Q&A, is that live? I'm pleased to inform you that it is now live. You can request testimonials against specific properties and have those featured on those properties. And then we've got an invoicing section as well for you, which just summarises all of the things that you've purchased through the site, and hopefully good for tax records, etc. Thanks, Nick. So in terms of the future, obviously the UK is really, really strong at the moment. It's ranked #1 in terms of universities in the world. We've got a great academic record. I think with what's happening in the US, there has been changes to the rules on visas post-study in the US, which has meant that there's a lot of Indian students that are now choosing the UK. So it's become very popular from that perspective. The demand from China is still very strong for UK universities. We are seeing growth in Europe, and there's multiple cities in Europe that are now becoming sort of hotspots. That's kind of one to watch. And our plans is to expand internationally next year. So we are looking to develop AFS outside of the UK. The main thing that's happening at the moment, which I sort of alluded to at the start, and I think Nick touched upon, is obviously the growth, the number of 18-year-olds that are coming in. So the domestic market is very, very strong, and that's set to continue. So from a landlording perspective and the student accommodation market as a whole, we feel that it's right. We've certainly seen from the students that we've spoken to that they want that university living experience. The home learning, there was a lot of students that did it through the first lockdown, and they couldn't wait to get back to university. We saw students in Manchester, returning early because they wanted to be with their friends, and they saw no real difference from staying at home with mum and dad to staying with their group of friends at university. And as Nick pointed out earlier as well, I think it was, all in the media at the start of the term, but the reality was that students, have been well behaved. And, at that very first moment, when they all arrived at university, there was nothing open for them, no gigs, no bars and things doing the regular parties, and groups of 6 still required, etc. So what they were expected to do, of course, they were going to spend time with the people that they were living with, and obviously where there was groups there, it did cause problems with the virus spreading. But now students have found their bubbles at university, and things have calmed down. and certainly from what we've heard and seen, they're happy at university now with their peers. Obviously, treatment from universities that with sort of changes that happened. We probably saw in the press that there was a fence that was pulled down last week, which aroused the tension of students, I think, and that's because they've not been consulted on things, and their voice hasn't been heard. So it's been unfortunate on that side, and we're very keen to support students and landlords. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. We have had quite a large number of questions, so I think it's probably worth just spending a couple of minutes going through some of those, if that works for you. So one of the questions that has come in is what is a flexible tenancy contract? And I should have perhaps explained really that was something that students asked for. Can we have a flexible tenancy contract? I think the way that we've seen it interpreted is mainly in PBSAs, where they've offered, say, a cancellation if you can't travel because of COVID, or the ability to cancel if your university closes, or late start. So really, I think what students are asking for there is a little bit of flexibility. So obviously quite difficult to deliver, but I think we just wanted to share with you in terms of where students are at and what they're thinking. I think the other thing I just wanted to cover very briefly as well is somebody asked about bills inclusive, and I know it's a really sort of basic point for many of you. How do I stop the additional cost, if a student overuses? Well, it's my understanding that the market's evolved a bit now, and there are suppliers out there that will take the risk. So if a student does overuse, it's not your problem. Effectively, they take the risk. So they may well be worth exploring, and we can send some information about those around after the session. We've also had a question as, do you work with university property offices? We do, and in short, we'd like to work with more. Our focus is our landlords and HMOs, and we're open to working with any student accommodation provider.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed another question here is when you think that things will return to normal. So obviously, there was news yesterday that there's a vaccine that's been produced by Pfizer, and it's got a 90% success rate with it. So obviously, we're all very hopeful that that works, and that as many people as possible can get it. I think the reality is that COVID is going to be with us for a time period. So it's important that we do, what we can to prepare for that. And I think that, there will be pockets of the virus for some time to come now. But, we are doing everything that we can and doing things right. And, students are now much more familiar and understand COVID and understand how to live and deal with it, which means that from a market perspective, it remains robust.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. One other question that's quite interesting as well, just to reflect on, is one of the attendees asked about demand for student accommodation in January over last year due to the late starts. Yes, we are anticipating that, and as we alluded to at the top of the presentation, perhaps that's going to be intensified as well, because there's a lot of postgraduate students that the course doesn't start until January, and also a quantity of international students, for example, that have had delayed starts to their course.
Do you think students need extra support during this time? A lot of our research shows that students are adapting well and adopting new social patterns so that they can stay in touch with their friends in safe and secure ways. We're conscious that there may be an impact on mental health, though, however, and we've recently started sponsoring Student Minds, the charity, and we're keen to just do more with them. So we will be announcing news of that in the next couple of weeks of how we intend to work with them and support them in that.
Thanks, Simon. Just one practical point that has been raised as well, which is worth reflecting on, is one of the delegates has asked about student reviews, and you can have student reviews if the student hasn't found accommodation through AFS. You can invite past students to provide a testimonial. That's fine. So we're going to cover another couple of questions, and then I think we should wrap this up. We're not going to get to all of the questions, but we will follow up after the session. Simon, one of the questions has been around timescale for virtual tours or video tours of landlord properties. My understanding is that that is fairly imminent, and we expect to be able to have that shortly.
Yes, I think I said next week for that one, but I'm going to put the pressure on the team here and say we'll deliver that for Friday.
Yep, good stuff. Any more questions you want to address, Simon, or are we going to call up the day?
I'm just having a quick look through the list. Now has been a few different things mentioned about flexible contracts.
Whilst I'm looking through, one thing just to let you know is we'll be following up the session with a questionnaire, so you can give us some feedback. But specifically, we're looking for any more topics that you want to explore. We also starting a new project, which is to sort of further enhance our understanding of the landlord sector, understand what your issues and concerns are and how we can help. So we'd like to hold a focus group of landlords, which isn't something that we've done for a while. So we'll do that on Zoom. If you'd like to get involved in that, and then we will be grateful. And then we'll follow that up with a sort of survey study and another session to sort of share those results as well. So after the session, if you keep an eye out for that email, it will be great, A, to get the feedback, B, to get any more suggestions that you have, and C, if you're happy to get involved with some focus groups, then to do so.
Yeah. And lastly, there was a question in there. Somebody, Jane Taylor said, did you say we could advertise for free? And yes, as it's our 20th anniversary, we have applied a 1-month free advertising credit to every single landlord and agent account as a thank you for working with us. So please, use that and enjoy the credit, and we hope you rent your property out.
Okay, thank you. As I said, we'll make sure every question is answered offline, and we will follow up with a survey. Thank you for your time today. We hope you enjoyed the session, and please keep an eye out for sort of future events.
Thank you very much. Bye now.